a $2,000 promise that has America watching closely. As we approach the final days of 2025, a familiar but powerful topic has once again taken center stage in America's financial conversation. A proposed $2,000 tariff dividend check, publicly backed by former President Donald Trump and aimed squarely at everyday Americans. This is not just another political soundbite. It is a proposal that, if it becomes law, could directly affect seniors, retirees, working families, veterans, and low-income households across the country. And that's exactly why millions of Americans are paying close attention right now. According to Trump's own statements, this $2,000 payment would be funded not by borrowing or deficit spending, but by revenue generated from tariffs on imported goods. In simple terms, the administration's trade policies would produce enough income to send direct payments back to American citizens. That framing is critical because it separates this proposal from past stimulus checks that were financed through federal debt. Trump has repeatedly emphasized one key point. This payment is planned for 2026, not 2025. While many Americans hoped for relief before the holidays, the timeline has now shifted clearly into the new year. And with 2026 just days away, the question has moved from "is this real?" to "when could it realistically happen?" From a financial analysis standpoint, this proposal arrives at a time when household budgets remain under extreme pressure. Grocery prices are significantly higher than they were just a few years ago. Rent, utilities, insurance, and medical costs continue to climb. For seniors living on fixed incomes and families living paycheck to paycheck, even a single $2,000 payment could mean catching up on bills, avoiding debt, or building a small emergency cushion. But here's where responsible analysis matters. A proposal is not a law. No matter how confident the language sounds, no check can be issued unless Congress passes legislation and the payment mechanism is formally approved. That distinction is essential, especially for older Americans who cannot afford to make financial decisions based on promises alone. In this series, we're going to break down what is being proposed, who may qualify, what obstacles stand in the way, and what realistic timelines look like, without hype, without fear-mongering, and without false guarantees. The goal is simple: clarity over confusion, preparation over panic, and facts over speculation. Because when it comes to your money, your retirement, and your financial security, you deserve straight answers, not headlines designed to mislead. Why this proposal is gaining attention right now. To understand why the proposed $2,000 tariff dividend checks are resonating so strongly with Americans, especially seniors and working households, we need to look at the economic reality on the ground, not political messaging. Over the past several years, the cost of living in the United States has risen sharply. Food prices alone have increased by more than 20% in a relatively short period of time. That means a grocery bill that once cost $100 now regularly costs well over $120. For retirees living on Social Security and families on fixed or modest incomes, that difference is not theoretical. It's felt every single week. Housing costs, utilities, insurance premiums, prescription medications, and transportation expenses have all moved higher. At the same time, wages and benefit adjustments have struggled to keep pace. Even modest financial shocks, a car repair, a medical bill, or a temporary loss of income can push households into debt very quickly. This is the backdrop against which Trump's tariff dividend proposal has emerged. From a strategic perspective, the idea is designed to address affordability, which polling consistently shows is one of the top concerns for American voters. Analysts widely agree that recent elections were influenced heavily by frustration over rising costs, and this proposal appears aimed at restoring confidence among voters who feel financially squeezed. What makes this proposal different and controversial is the funding mechanism. Rather than borrowing money or expanding the federal deficit, Trump argues that tariff revenue collected from foreign imports could be redirected back to U.S. citizens. In theory, this creates a closed loop. Tariffs generate revenue, and that revenue funds direct payments to Americans. From a policy standpoint, this is a bold claim. Tariff revenue does exist, but its size can fluctuate based on trade volumes, court rulings, and economic conditions. That uncertainty is one reason economists and lawmakers remain divided on whether a $2,000 payment is financially sustainable. Still, the messaging has struck a chord. For many Americans, especially seniors, the idea of receiving a dividend rather than a handout carries psychological weight. It frames the payment as a return of value rather than emergency aid. something earned indirectly through national trade policy. This helps explain why public support for the concept is unusually high. Surveys show broad bipartisan backing, suggesting that this is not being viewed strictly through a partisan lens. Instead, many Americans see it as practical relief during an ongoing affordability crisis. However, strong public interest does not guarantee implementation. In the next section, we'll move from economic motivation to the most important question of all: who would actually qualify for this money and who would not? Who would qualify for the $2,000 tariff dividend check? Now we arrive at the question that matters most to millions of viewers watching closely: who would actually qualify for the proposed $2,000 tariff dividend check, and under what conditions? Based on Trump's public statements and the structure of previous similar proposals, eligibility would primarily be determined by income, citizenship, and tax filing status. While final rules cannot exist until legislation is written, we can analyze the most likely framework using historical precedent. First, let's talk about income limits. Analysts widely point to the American Worker Rebate Act, introduced earlier this year, as a reference model. That proposal set the eligibility threshold at $100,000 in annual income or less for individuals. Under that structure, anyone earning at or below that level would qualify for the full $2,000 payment, while higher earners would be excluded. For working families, this would cover a broad segment of the population, including parents juggling multiple jobs just to keep up with rising expenses. For households where income remains modest but stable, a $2,000 payment could represent meaningful short-term relief. For seniors, this is especially significant. Individuals receiving Social Security retirement benefits, SSI or SSDI, would be expected to qualify, even if Social Security is their only source of income. Importantly, this would apply even to seniors who do not normally owe federal income taxes. The same principle extends to people with disabilities and veterans receiving VA benefits or military pensions, as long as their income falls below the proposed threshold. The intention, at least in theory, is broad inclusion among Americans who rely on fixed or limited incomes. One critical requirement, however, cannot be overlooked: tax filing. Even individuals with zero taxable income would still need to file a federal tax return. The IRS cannot issue payments to individuals it cannot identify within the tax system. For many seniors who stopped filing years ago, this would be an essential step. Another major distinction, and one that separates this proposal from pandemic-era stimulus checks, is citizenship. Trump has stated clearly that this payment would go to U.S. citizens only. Green card holders, visa holders, asylum recipients, and other non-citizen residents would not be eligible under current guidance. That restriction has legal, political, and humanitarian implications, but from a practical standpoint, it sets a clear eligibility boundary. In the next section, we'll take a closer look at the groups most likely to be excluded and why understanding those exclusions now can help families avoid unpleasant surprises later. Who may be excluded and why that matters? While the proposed $2,000 tariff dividend check could reach millions of Americans, it's just as important to understand who may not receive it and why those exclusions matter from both a financial and planning standpoint. The most straightforward exclusion involves higher income earners. Based on prior legislative models and Trump's own language, individuals earning over $100,000 per year would likely be excluded entirely or phased out of eligibility. This mirrors past rebate proposals that aim to concentrate relief on households most affected by rising costs. From a policy perspective, this exclusion is designed to limit the total cost of the program and reduce political resistance related to federal spending. From a personal finance standpoint, it means households above the income threshold should not factor this payment into future budgeting or planning. Another major exclusion involves non-citizens. Unlike pandemic-era stimulus checks, which included certain legal residents, this proposal is explicitly limited to U.S. citizens only. That means green card holders, individuals on work visas, asylum seekers, and undocumented immigrants would not qualify under the current framework. This distinction is critical for mixed-status households, where some family members are citizens and others are not. Depending on how the legislation is written, eligibility could be determined on an individual basis rather than household-wide, creating complexity and potential confusion. There is also a less discussed but equally important exclusion risk: non-filers. Even eligible citizens with qualifying income levels may miss out entirely if they do not file a federal tax return. The IRS relies on tax records to issue payments, and without a return on file, there is no mechanism to send funds. This is particularly relevant for seniors who stopped filing years ago because their income fell below taxable thresholds. In previous stimulus programs, special non-filer tools were created. As of now, there is no guarantee such tools would be available again. Additionally, depending on how Congress structures the final bill, payments could be subject to garnishment for certain outstanding obligations. These may include unpaid federal taxes, child support arrears, or other government debts. While this detail has not been finalized, it remains a realistic possibility based on past programs. Understanding exclusions is not about discouragement, it's about financial realism. Knowing where you stand allows you to plan responsibly, avoid false expectations, and take proactive steps if eligibility depends on action such as filing taxes. In the next section, we'll examine the biggest obstacles standing between this proposal and actual checks being sent, including congressional approval, budget concerns, and legal challenges that could derail the plan entirely. The political and legal obstacles. Standing in the way, at this point in the analysis, it's critical to shift from what could happen to what must happen before any $2,000 tariff dividend check becomes real. And the truth is, the road ahead is filled with political and legal obstacles that cannot be ignored. First and foremost, Congress must approve this payment. No matter how strongly a president supports an idea, no stimulus-style check can be issued without legislation passing both the House of Representatives and the Senate. As of now, no official bill has been introduced specifically authorizing a $2,000 tariff dividend payment. This alone places the proposal firmly in what analysts call the promise phase. Until a bill is drafted, assigned a number, debated in committee, and brought to a vote, there is no legal authority for the IRS to issue payments. History provides an important warning sign here. Earlier this year, a separate proposal, the American Worker Rebate Act, suggested payments of just $600. That bill failed to gain traction and never even reached a floor vote. If Congress could not advance a $600 payment, many lawmakers are openly questioning how a $2,000 payment would succeed. One of the biggest concerns raised by fiscal conservatives is national debt, which currently exceeds $37 trillion. Several senators have stated plainly that they will not support any measure that increases federal obligations, regardless of how popular the idea may be with voters. Trump's counterargument is that this money would not be borrowed. He claims it would be funded entirely through tariff revenue, meaning taxes paid by foreign exporters. However, this claim is under scrutiny. The Congressional Budget Office has recently lowered its projections for tariff revenue, raising doubts about whether sufficient funds would actually be available. Adding another layer of uncertainty is the Supreme Court. The court is expected to rule on the scope of presidential authority related to emergency powers used to impose tariffs. If the court limits or overturns that authority, the very funding source for these checks could disappear. In other words, even if Congress were inclined to act, the legal foundation supporting tariff-based payments may not be stable. This does not mean the proposal is dead, but it does mean that Americans, and especially seniors who rely on predictable income, should approach this development with measured expectations rather than assumptions. In the next section, we'll examine why, despite these obstacles, public support remains unusually strong, and how that pressure could influence lawmakers heading into the 2026 midterm elections. Public support, political pressure, and why timing matters. Despite the significant political and legal hurdles facing the proposed $2,000 tariff dividend checks, one factor continues to keep this idea alive: overwhelming public support. And in Washington, public opinion still carries weight, especially when elections are approaching. According to a recent nationwide poll, 71% of voters support the idea of tariff-funded dividend checks. That level of approval is rare in today's polarized political environment. Even more notable, the support cuts across party lines, suggesting that this proposal resonates with Americans as a practical financial issue rather than a purely ideological one. For lawmakers, numbers like these are impossible to ignore. Members of Congress are highly sensitive to voter sentiment, particularly in the years leading up to midterm elections. With the 2026 midterms on the horizon, many representatives and senators will soon face re-election campaigns where affordability, inflation, and cost of living pressures are front and center. From a strategic standpoint, a $2,000 payment offers a powerful political message. It is simple, tangible, and easy for voters to understand. Unlike complex tax credits or long-term policy reforms, A direct payment speaks immediately to households struggling with everyday expenses. This is especially relevant for seniors. Older Americans vote at higher rates than any other demographic group. When seniors express strong opinions about financial relief, policymakers listen. For retirees on fixed incomes, even a one-time payment can significantly ease short-term stress, and that reality is well understood on Capitol Hill. Timing, however, is everything. Analysts outline several possible legislative windows. The fastest scenario would involve a bill being introduced early in 2026, moving quickly through committee and reaching a vote by late January or February. This would require strong leadership support and minimal internal opposition. A more realistic timeline places congressional debate in the spring of 2026 with potential passage between March and May. In that case, the IRS would likely need several weeks to prepare payment systems, meaning checks or direct deposits could arrive sometime in late spring or early summer. Of course, delays are common. Political negotiations, amendments, and legal challenges could easily push any action into mid to late 2026 or stop it altogether. What's important for viewers to understand is this. Public support increases pressure, but it does not guarantee results. Congress acts slowly by design, and even popular ideas can stall. In the next section, we'll shift focus from politics to practical preparation. The concrete steps Americans should take now to be ready if this proposal moves forward. How to prepare now without taking financial risks. When it comes to proposals like the $2,000 tariff dividend check, the smartest approach is not blind optimism or outright skepticism. It is practical preparation without financial risk. This is especially important for seniors, retirees, and households living on fixed or limited incomes. The first and most critical step is tax filing. Even if you earn little to no taxable income, and even if you normally do not file, having a 2025 federal tax return on record may be essential. The IRS cannot send money to individuals it cannot identify in its system. Filing does not mean you owe taxes. It simply creates a record. For seniors receiving Social Security, SSI, or SSDI, this point cannot be overstated. In previous stimulus programs, non-filer tools were sometimes available. There is no guarantee such tools will exist again. Filing proactively protects your eligibility. Second, make sure your direct deposit and mailing information is up to date with the IRS bank accounts change. People move. If the IRS sends a payment to a closed account or outdated address, delays can stretch into months. A few minutes reviewing your information on irs.gov can prevent major frustration later. Third, verify that your citizenship status is correctly reflected in your Social Security and tax records. For naturalized citizens, discrepancies in documentation can cause unnecessary complications. Ensuring accuracy now avoids last-minute problems if payments are authorized. Fourth, remain highly alert to scams. Whenever stimulus-style payments are discussed publicly, scammers move quickly. Phone calls, emails, or text messages claiming to release your payment for a fee are red flags. The IRS will never demand payment or personal information by phone or text. Just as important as preparation is restraint. Do not make financial commitments based on money you do not yet have. Do not promise creditors future payments. Do not take on new debt assuming relief is guaranteed. Hope is not a financial strategy. If the payment happens, treat it as a bonus, not a rescue plan. Think ahead about how you would use $2,000 responsibly, paying down high-interest debt, covering essential expenses, or building a small emergency fund. Finally, stay informed through reliable sources, not social media speculation. Real updates will involve bill numbers, committee hearings, and official IRS guidance. In the final section, we'll bring everything together, summarizing what we know, what we don't, and how Americans should realistically view this proposal moving forward. The bottom line: hope, reality, and responsible expectations. As we bring this analysis to a close, it's important to step back and look clearly at what we know for certain, what remains uncertain, and how Americans, especially seniors, should realistically view the proposed $2,000 tariff dividend checks. Here's what is clear. Donald Trump has publicly and repeatedly endorsed the idea of issuing $2,000 payments funded by tariff revenue. He has stated plainly that these checks would not arrive in 2025, but rather in 2026, which is now just days away. This is not an offhand comment made once. It is a position he has reiterated in multiple settings to multiple audiences. We also know that the proposal has generated strong public support, with roughly 71% of voters expressing approval. That level of backing creates political pressure, particularly with the 2026 midterm elections approaching. Lawmakers are keenly aware that affordability remains a top concern for voters, especially older Americans living on fixed incomes. At the same time, several critical uncertainties remain. No bill has been introduced, Congress has not debated or voted on any legislation authorizing this payment. The funding mechanism, tariff revenue, faces both economic and legal challenges, including a pending Supreme Court review that could impact the very authority used to impose those tariffs. In other words, this proposal sits squarely between promise and policy. For viewers, the most responsible takeaway is this: prepare but do not depend. Filing taxes, updating IRS records, verifying information, and staying alert to scams are smart, low-risk steps. Making financial decisions based on money that does not yet exist is not. If this payment does become reality, $2,000 can make a meaningful difference. It can prevent an eviction, cover medical expenses, repair a vehicle, or simply provide breathing room during an ongoing affordability crisis. But it should be treated as supplemental relief, not a foundation for long-term planning. There is also a broader message embedded in this moment. When a policy proposal receives overwhelming public support, it reminds us that civic engagement matters. Calling representatives, staying informed, and voting are not symbolic acts. They shape outcomes. Whether or not this specific payment is ultimately approved, the financial pressures facing American households are real, and they demand continued attention from policymakers. The smartest position is neither blind faith nor outright dismissal. It is measured optimism grounded in facts. As always, stay informed, stay cautious, and protect your financial stability above all else. When verified updates emerge, legislation introduced, votes scheduled, or payment dates confirmed, those are the moments that warrant action. Until then, preparation is power, patience is protection, and clarity is your greatest asset.